Who killed him?
The MCU is Ant-Man and the Wasp, quantumania, the worst MCU movie? No, not really. The thing with Ant-Man and the Wasp and quantumania and the Kang and the MODOK is it feels like underbaked, right? Like it needed a little bit more time to like cook in the kitchen or something. It's a hollow kind of feeling movie, but is it the worst in the MCU? I don't think so. So with like a very high level, unspoiler review of Ant-Man and Wasp, it's more of like a setup movie for a Phase 5. It's not very Ant-Man-y except for the beginning, which I think the beginning is kind of strong, where it's more of the slice of life in the day in the life. But it's really to set up a bigger story with Kang. And luckily, Kang is pretty solid for the most part. I think there's a bit of campiness and a bit of corniness, and they try to overdo it a little bit with Kang, which is a little bit of a downfall of the movie, just in terms of general writing and the script. But the performance from Kang's actor is so good that, Majors just kind of elevates the material that he's given and makes it enjoyable. Now, looking at MCU as a whole, right? Now, is Ant-Man and the Wasp 3, whatever, is that the worst one in the MCU? And I'm going to say it's definitely a bottom 5, most likely, right? I haven't done a ranking of all the movies since Phase 4, but it's pretty clearly a bottom tier movie, and it kind of sits around where I think Ant-Man and the Wasp 2 is, where it's like the opposite effect, where Ant-Man and the Wasp 2 kind of felt like a weird kind of filler in between movie that had its character moments but didn't really know what to do with them, right? And didn't do it super well. This one has not enough character moments and not enough Ant-Man-y stuff, and is trying to play into the grander MCU, but then is doing it not like that's taking away from the strength of what an Ant-Man movie is. I love the first Ant-Man movie, and I think that perfectly encapsulated what this should be. It's another pocket of the MCU with literal smaller stakes, literally with great characters, great side characters, but a lot of emotion there and a lot of creativity in the action and everything. And with Ant-Man and the Wasp 2, you kind of lost a lot of that. And then Ant-Man and the Wasp 3, you lost a lot of that as well, but in different directions, where one's trying to be too separate from the MCU and do its own thing, but not really finding its own personality very well and writing the characters in an interesting, engaging way that grows them. And this one, you don't get anything really that's growing the characters or anything, but it's so engaged in the larger MCU picture, that's kind of where it falters. So when we look at the bottom tier MCU, right, I think a lot of it is just from Phase 4, right? I think this might be slightly better than Multiverse of Madness, which I hated and didn't work for me as all. And this is not even going into the Disney Plus projects of the TV show, solely the movies. I think it's probably somewhere around, I don't know, maybe the early Thor movies, right? I think at the end of the day, it's still better than Eternals, which I've had a rant on that before, but I think Eternals is by far the lowest in the MCU. It's going to be kind of hard to beat that unless you have something more shallow and without void of any character or meaning or coherent storytelling or emotion than that, versus this one where there's a bit of emotion, but the thing is the cast doesn't really do a great job, right? No, they rush it, right? This is a 2-hour movie, which again, movies can be 2 hours, and don't get me wrong, right? But I think this is one of the MCU movies that actually would have benefited from being one of those 2.5-hour movies, because they introduce a whole new realm, right, that we barely get to see anything of. It's super rushed. You have all these characters they kind of throw in. You kind of none of them are memorable. None of the new characters, the setting or anything. It's obviously a huge CGI fest, and I know people have been hating on the CGI, and it's the reason I ask some parts of the CGI are not great is because there's just so much of it. But they throw in all these characters, including big ones like MODOK, right? And they don't give any time to really care about them, right, or anything. And then they have these emotional moments that are supposed to happen. And again, this doesn't feel like a conflict for Ant-Man, and that was one of the big flaws in the movie. So, I mean, pros, that Kang was for the most part pretty good. But minus is that the setting isn't great despite being weird. The action doesn't really hit, the emotion doesn't hit. There's no character growth or character moments. Now when I'm thinking about it, there is a lot of negatives, a lot more than I even thought. But is it the bottom of the MCU? I still would say no. I mean, I'd probably give this movie a 4 out of 10, and that might be kind to it, where I think it's slightly below average for a film, where 5 is average to me. And yeah, man, I think it's still better than Multiverse of Madness because this one still had a little bit of more emotion, a little bit more of a coherent story to be told, with a few of the comedic moments actually kind of landing in this one, mostly because of Paul Rudd's charisma, and some of the more hype kind of epic moments kind of coming together a little bit weird better, and it's a little more weird than what Multiverse of Madness was. Should have been a lot more weird, but didn't really work. And the character motivations in this one make sense while being very paper thin. They kind of make sense. And then again, still think it's better than Eternals. And is it better than some other MCU projects? Like I think it's still worse than like Iron Man 2, which still had a lot of hard and fun, memorable characters. I think it might be better than the early Thor movies, or around that, you know, where I don't know. It's tough to culminate, but with the dialogue right now being like MCU's over, or like this is the bottom tier, like one of the worst movies. Yeah, it's definitely one of the worst ones. I don't think it is the worst one. Critically, I kind of agree where it's at, but I think there's a lot of other movies in MCUs that should have been panned harder critically than this one. It's weird that maybe they're just picking up the trend now, even though they hated on some of the previous ones, but I think some of the other ones kind of should have been lower than what they were. So yeah, that's kind of like a jumbled up discussion of what that is. So appreciate you watching, and take it easy. Ant-Man the Wasp 3 or 2, I guess, because the first one wasn't the Wasp. Yeah, it's not a great movie, but it sets up MCU stuff. So go watch it eventually, maybe, potentially, or watch the Kang scenes.
Oh no, no.